Good afternoon, good morning, or good night. This is Bill Gustin, captain with Miami-Dade County Fire Rescue Department in Southeast Florida. I'm here with my panel of esteemed guests for another Wednesday Humpday Hangout. Our theme this month will be water supply. And we're very lucky to have a special guest with us that is quite an authority on water supply, and that's Paul Shapiro, a retired engineer from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'll let him do his own introduction, but just a little bit about myself. I've been a captain on the Miami-Dade Fire Department. I've been on the job for 40 years, and I had spent 5 years as a firefighter in the Chicago area. And I was also very lucky to my dad was a lieutenant on the Chicago Fire Department. In fact, he had some very strong opinions about water supply and kind of wondered in such a critical way of how my department operates. But we'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. I want to thank our sponsor, Key. That's keyfire.com. I got plenty to talk about Key hose. My department is embarking on a huge project because we're a big department and about 70 stations now. And for us to switch the hose that we're using for high-rise operation, this is not an easy task. And we are transitioning to 2-inch hose with 2.5-inch couplings. That doesn't mean that we are going to rule out using 2-inch hose or 2.5-inch hose, but for our primary standpipe line, we're going to be operating with 375-foot sections of Key combat-ready 2-inch hose with 2.5-inch couplings. We're looking at flows of 250 gallons a minute at 100 psi outlet pressures. You can't kink the hose. We have tried it in every which way we can. Just recently, we laid all 225 feet from the standpipe outlet down to the 2 floors below the fire and then back up, and still couldn't kink it. Well, you ask, well, why did we do that? Well, that's a situation where there would not be any public hallway to lay out the hose. Again, worst case scenario. Next month, I'll show you some pictures or some videos of that. I'm ready to go rock and roll. I've got my Station 2 mascot behind me, the Joker. Got my 1954 Lucky Squad, auto car squad, kind of rig that my dad used to ride in Chicago. And from here, I'm going to pass the program on to Mike on the road. It's Mike Dugan, Captain Mike Dugan. He's en route. He's in his Bentley. He's got pretty good sound. Is that the Bentley? Is it the Bentley or the Rolls Royce? I can't remember, Mike.
It's the Maserati. Come on, Bill. It's the Maserati. So I am on the road back home from visiting my daughter, and I figured I would try our Google from being on the road. So here I am, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with everybody today. And we will talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on in New York. We've had a tough couple of weeks, lost a couple of brothers in a military accident, a brother in a fire, and lost 5 men last month from 9/11 cancer. So it's been a tough couple of weeks for us. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the Trump Tower fire.
Yeah, let me. We'll ask you specifically about that, Mike.
Okay.
Okay. Our next guest is Jason Hobelman. Jason.
Hey, good afternoon. Jason Hobelman from North St. Louis County at the Florissant Valley Fire and Protection District, and co-owner of Engine House Training. And happy to be here for another great conversation.
Oh, great. And I'm going to ask you specifically about the fire that you were operating at last night. Okay, our next guest is Daryl Liggins. Daryl from Oakland, a little bit about yourself.
How are you guys doing, and good morning? Yeah, it has been a tough month for the fire service, losing a few firefighters across this country. I did have the ability to make it out to the funeral services and FDNY, and hopefully it's going to be a long time before we have to deal with something like that again. My name is Daryl Liggins. I'm a captain in the Oakland, California Fire Department. This is my 25th year in the fire service. I had the privilege to be part of changing our hose spec and our hose bed that includes our water supply and attack operations, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent, excellent. Little bit about our next guest that I'm going to have him introduce himself. In the early 80s, I took a number of courses at the National Fire Academy. And in the evenings after class, I would spend my time up in the library, fire geek that I am, rather than at the command post bar or in town in Emmitsburg. I was in the library, geek that I am. Did I mention I was a geek, fire geek? I would read these articles in Western Fire Journal, which was strange to me because I lived on the East Coast. I wasn't familiar with the magazine, and started reading articles on water supply and large diameter hose by Paul Shapiro, an engineer on the Las Vegas Fire Department. Now, this is before we had LDH, but I would copy those articles knowing that there was a great possibility our department would at some point switch to LDH. And that was how I got my head start with LDH and helped the department train for operating with 5-inch hose, in our case, 5-inch hose and appliances. So this fella has been at it a long time, and I don't think there's anybody in the fire service that knows more or has written more or taught more about water supply operations than Paul Shapiro. Okay, Paul, now that you got a big head, as I complimented you, maybe your mustache will be in proportion to it now. But can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, you gave me a lot to back up, so I'll give it a try. I was engineer for the Las Vegas Fire Department, pump operator for those that call it something else. 28 years. I decided never to go past that position because I loved hose evolutions and making the water go. I was given the task back in probably 84 to develop large diameter hose for our department, a one-man committee, because nobody else wanted to do it. We then had 2 engines that had 5-inch hose on it, and they were busy engines. That's why they put them on there. And all we knew was to lay a forward lay and hook up, and that was it. Well, again, I was given this opportunity, and I did the research and found out there's so many different ways to use it, and nobody's doing it. They've called it the miracle hose. Laying a LDH line is like laying an above the ground water main. So what does that tell you? It tells you that you don't do nothing with it. You just lay it and use it. When you run out of water, it's nobody's fault. There's just no more water. Well, that's really not true. And so over the years, I've just expanded on this knowledge and put it on paper. In fact, thanks to Penwell, I've got a book contract coming this year where it's finally going to get published. I write for the magazine still. I still teach at FDIC, which again, thank you for that.
What's the name of your class?
Anchor and Hold is my class. I had to think for a minute. It's a wildland class, but we're interjecting structural hose evolutions via blitz attacks to control the structure fires instead of just letting them burn.
You know what day you're teaching?
I teach on Wednesday, and I don't remember the date. In the afternoon. You caught me on that one.
Sorry.
But 25th. 25th. Thank you, Bobby. So here I am. I teach all over the country. I've even taught in Chile. I'm going back to Chile this summer to teach, and that's a wild experience in itself. So I'm always learning. I've been retired 10 years, and I learn every time I teach.
Well, Paul, what I want to see is you up on a llama, laying some line with that would be a sight to see, Paul.
Do they have llamas in Israel?
They got camels in Israel.
Okay.
And I think they're out of the same animal family, I think.
Oh, really?
See, boss, I told you, we'd never have anything to stop talking about. If we stop talking about fire, we got a wide range of subjects we can talk about. camels in Israel. And then Clark Lamping, young man. The young man sitting there next to the old man.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Clark Lamping, captain of the Clark County Fire Department, 20 years on the job. Still working on Las Vegas Boulevard, still working at Station 11. As I mentioned, every time to get under Daryl's skin, first into the Las Vegas Raiders Stadium when they built that, 2020. And it's a very exciting night for us. For the first time in the history of Las Vegas, we have our first championship hockey game tonight. Also in my first LA Kings versus the Golden Knights. So keep your fingers crossed that all the idiots stay home and we have a nice quiet night at the hockey game. One story real quick. I got a funny story. Paul worked for Las Vegas. I worked for Clark County, 2 different departments, but I was at a station once 14 that we shared a border. We had a fire one day. My rescue was first in. I caught a water supply. I thought I parked the rescue far enough away, but they had these oleander bushes on the side of the fire, and these oleander bushes are really, really heavy oil in them. And so the fire extends in these oleander bushes, blows up these oleander bushes. Paul Shapiro shows up on engine 4. He's a primary pumper. 2 lines come off engine 4. He starts fighting the fire. I'm on water supply. I can't move. My rescue 14 starts smoking, starts catching on fire. Not only is Paulie pumping 2 lines of the fire, he takes the jump line out himself and puts rescue 14 off. Puts rescue 14 out while he's pumping the fire. So I owe Paulie a rescue unit.
Lots of bubbles. Use the foam.
And we got one more fella here, Bobby Halton. You'd like to tell a little bit about yourself?
I'm Bobby Halton. That's about it. So we're about a week away from FDIC. Can't wait to see you all there. Got a great bunch of folks here to talk about hose. Before you do your planning, if you wouldn't mind going online, signing up for the fun run and the stair climb. Those are the 2 events that are really important to me. Physical fitness is a personal journey, right? But it's always fun when you can share a few minutes jogging 3.2 miles, and you can walk, you can jog, you can. We've actually had people smoke cigars and drink beer while they did the walk, which is fine. However you want to get it done. So, but we really appreciate your support there. We've got some great keynoters, Dan DeGrice, Gavin Horn, who are going to do a wonderful job on Wednesday and Thursday. We've got a technology summit, which is going to blow you away with the folks we've brought into there for the technology summit. Fool's Bash on Wednesday night is going to be just amazing. We'd really love to see you there. We're going to have a Stop, Drop, Rock and Roll on Thursday night. The MSA Block Party is happening. Of course, the Union Bash on Friday night. And then Saturday night, the folks in Greenfield are holding a beer garden party with bands and music and pumper pull and all kinds of great stuff. So I'd love to have you there. There's amazing classes left, some room left in the hands-on training. A lot of the classes are already sold out, but there are some spaces left. If you're still looking to do some hands-on, I'd highly recommend you do that. Some space left in a lot of the workshops, and some great workshops available for you all to take too. So a lot of neat stuff going on. I'm knee-deep in it. I apologize. I probably won't be able to stay for the whole show. I'll stay as long as I can. I'm the hall monitor. That's my official job. I'm here to make sure that everybody has their passes and Bill maintains his usual high level of decorum. So that's my role here, which is a great role to have. And we got a lot of interesting stuff going on. You know, the evolution of how we've done water supply is fascinating, whether it's Humpday valves, large diameter hand lines around the pump pumping. And I've had the great pleasure to have been working with Paulie and I and Bill. Paulie and I go back to doing hose testing with the FDNY. God, and that's got to be mid 90s, Paulie, 95, 94. We're out in the drill field together doing some pretty innovative stuff. At the time, you know, back then people still had a lot of cotton jacketed, laying dual lines, right? We all remember running, you know, dual deuces for water supply. We all remember nitro wrapped hose, and you know, we had forestry hose basically in a lot of the rigs for hand lines, 1.5 inches, and all of that's kind of moved forward, right? And the backstory of all that is really important to understand, and these are the guys to hear it from, right? So we got some neat things going on. Mike's going to talk a little bit about the Trump Tower fire, which is a fascinating fire and interesting insight into codes, whereas even in a city like New York, residential buildings above a certain height, where you have the residential section, have what are basically called, you know, common areas are sprinkled only, and not the actual residences. So some interesting issues like that to talk about, and water supply. Obviously, when you have a building with a fire on the 50th floor, it's an interesting fire. So Mike's going to talk a little bit about that. But just so you know, the battalion commander who ran that fire will be teaching with Curtis Massey in that high-rise class. So if you go to Curtis Massey's class and sign up, you'll get the full presentation on what happened at that fire from the man who actually ran that fire. Jason's going to be at FDIC teaching. He's going to talk today about a fire he had. He can give you more depth on that. Bill will be teaching. Mike will be teaching. Paul will be teaching. Clark will be teaching. We have one slacker in the group who I won't point out conspicuously. We'll be teaching next year. But I sure do appreciate this conversation because one of the things that I think in the fire service that we overlook, because we do have such reliable sources, generally speaking, and we've got such great equipment, is our water supplies and understanding all of the components of that system, right? It's a system, whether it's your hose, it's your nozzle, it's your pump, it's your water supply itself, it's how your community's put together. It's really incumbent on all of us to understand that more deeply, right? And then the ancillary stuff that comes off that, and Bill does a great job. I believe Bill is doing his devices class this year in part. He's going to be talking about all of the sprinkler delivery systems and all of that, which is just so intimately critical to what we do. So I'm gonna shut up now, but it's so neat. Oh, Ted Nee will be doing a great presentation on Thursday. Please come see Ted. Brock Long, the U.S. Fire Administrator, will be at the show. We have some surprise guests who are coming who I'm not allowed to say who they are. So if you're there at the show, you'll get to meet them. The folks from Chicago Fire will be there. The actor characters, they will be there. Some other really, really neat folks are coming who've asked us to kind of keep it quiet so that it doesn't create a hullabaloo among their fan base and all that good stuff. And they're coming to meet you and see you, and they're neat people. So hopefully you'll get to meet them and hang out with them. So that's happening. There's just so much to do and see there. I apologize if you don't have a downtown hotel room. Neither do I. I'm just kidding. I do. I shouldn't lie to you. But the hotels are just tough to come by. So I hope you got a decent hotel room. The shuttles will be great. Looking forward to seeing you all. And thank you so much, Billy, for this opportunity to pump the event. I'm very honored to have been able to participate in this event for the last, this will be my 14th year. It's been an incredible honor and privilege. I always enjoy doing it. I hope that we don't miss your expectations this year. We hope that it fulfills what you need from FDIC, and we're very grateful for your continued support. The numbers are overwhelming. We're already well beyond where we were last year. I'm so grateful to everyone who comes and so grateful to everyone who teaches and everyone who supports us in the vendor manufacturer community. It truly is a show without an ideology, and you'll hear people from every angle of the fire service. And the one thing that I would tell you about FDIC right now, and I hope my friends on this call will back me up, is that regardless of your opinion or regardless of your stance, you have no fear at FDIC to express yourself. No one will think any more or any less of you. It's a place where there's no ideology. We're not wedded to any particular group or belief in any way whatsoever. It's the place where everybody comes to share whatever's on their mind, and we're okay with that. And so please come and be yourself and enjoy the week. And I'll stop.
Well, I've been waiting because I've been very intrigued by the Trump Tower fire. Once again, the FDNY did an absolutely phenomenal job. And I can tell that from the time that they made the fire floor until the time that they achieved control of this fire, it was not quick, and it certainly wasn't easy. And there were 50 floors above. And Mike's going to tell us a little bit about the size, because when we think of residential high-rises, apartment buildings, hotels, we kind of rely on a degree of compartmentation. And Mike's going to tell us there wasn't too much compartmentation in the size of this due to the size of this apartment. So Mike, again, everybody that's just tuned in, Mike is driving in his Bentley. So we're doing this off of his cell phone. And although you're a good-looking guy, Mike, it doesn't matter how much of you we see. It's what you say that's important. So I'll let you take over and tell us a little bit about what's been going on in the FDNY.
Well, the fire, again, it's on a 50th floor. It came in, from what I was told, as a Class 3, an alarm, so no phone call was made. They went there and they had an advanced fire. I mean, we can see it was out the windows at one point during the fire. It's a very, very large apartment. From what I understand, it was 2 apartments that were turned into one at one point, which happens frequently in the city of New York. Some of the apartments we have are upwards. I was in one recently that was over 18,000 square feet for the gentleman's apartment, and he downsized. So it's just an amazing size of the apartment. I also heard it was very, very retro. So not all of the doors had doorknobs on them. They were push-type doors with a spring-loaded magnetic door closure thing. So some of the rooms were not easily visible, and in the smoke and fire condition, it was very, very difficult. This one, I heard the square footage was about 7,000 to 8,000 square feet. I'm not 100% sure on that right now, but there, again, just getting the water up there to that size, getting water up to the 50th floor is going to be, we had to get high pressure pumpers there to pump up. You're going to have fire pumps, make sure they're working, and the water supply. So it's just a very, very difficult fire. And again, it's going to be a very interesting, I can't wait. I hope I can go to the class and see how everything worked with the commander and find out exactly what they did.
Mike, as again, we rely on the compartmentation. If we just think, I wish Sam was here today because he could calculate in his head. If you use the National Fire Academy's formula for rapid extinguishment, rapid suppression of fire, it's roughly the area of fire involved divided by 3. So let's just say it was a 9,000 square foot apartment. Okay, you're looking at what? You're looking at 300 gallons a minute. That'd be about right. Look at Bobby's doing it. 300 gallons a minute. Yeah. Okay. Good. We got it. Well, are there fire departments that can deliver 300 gallons a minute from a 2.5-inch line? Yes. Chicago. They use an 1.25 inch tip. Can a fire department deliver 300 or 400 gallons a minute from a portable master stream device, such as I don't want to mention any brands, but you know what I'm talking about. It's got about 1 3/8 inches or 1.5 inch nozzle with a 2.5-inch inlet. That's not only for exterior jobs, that's for standpipe operations as well. And it's something that you'll need to be thinking about. And there's plenty of buildings over 50 stories outside New York City. So you just can't dismiss that fire and say, oh, that's an FDNY thing. The fire doesn't know what city it's in. It's going to require the same fire flow and the same personnel. But if it happens in your backyard, you're not on a big department like FDNY, you'll need the same amount of people, but they're going to be coming from a greater distance and from a lot more departments. The lesson there is you've got to play nice with each other in accordance with a regional high-rise procedure that you're all in on, that you all have the same similar threads, that you all have the same terminology, that you have interoperable equipment. So those are some of the things. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about the high pressure pumping? Before our conference began, I do recall somebody noticing that some of the high pressure lines were restrained by tubular webbing or rope. Can you explain what the idea is behind that?
Yeah, the high pressure hose is put on high pressure pumpers to increase the water supply in buildings such as, and they are tied off at the couplings on both sides. They are tied off to the engine itself, and they are then tied off usually to a substantial object Could be a tree, a fence, or something else. Or they could be tied off to the fire department connection. And then we tape off the area so people do not walk in there, firemen or civilians, in the area of the high-pressure hose. So if we have a problem, the couplings are color-coded, and the companies that do this know where their high-pressure hose is and what the bed is, and that is used as the supply to the fire department connection.
Yes, and you know, I just was going over. I'm tasked with revising our high-rise procedures, so I am in the course of plagiarizing and stealing information from high-rise plans from all over the country. So, interestingly, I was networking with a fellow that's heavily involved in high-rise procedures, Jimmy Davis. I'm going to give you a shout out, Jimmy, brother. Finally got to meet you from the Chicago Fire Department. A fellow brother from a different mother. He has his head and his heart in his job, particularly when it comes to high-rise firefighting. Interestingly, if there is a threat of falling glass in Chicago, they will thread the high-pressure hose to the fire department connection through their hard suction or draft hose as a protective sleeve, which I thought was pretty interesting. A little bit about as I said, my dad was a lieutenant on the Chicago Fire Department, and in his day, to a great extent today, the second line that comes off of an apparatus at a working fire in a city like Chicago comes off of a second engine attached to a second water source. Mike, I think it's basically the same way in the FDNY, is it not?
We can have two lines off the first bumper.
Okay.
The first two lines can come off the first bumper, and a lot of times the first bumper, depending on which way they're laying, they will drop two lines. So the second engine can, or really the third engine, is going to grab the second line. It's going to be there and available, ready for them. But only two hose lines can come off one bumper. Then you have to go to another bumper with another water source.
Well, when I explained to my dad how we operated by dropping one 5-inch line from a hydrant, and almost always with a flow of from 1,000 to 1,200 gallons a minute through that 5-inch line, we are basically operating like it's a large, long, soft suction hose. And it never occurred to us that one of these days somebody's going to drive a little Honda Civic up on that very relatively thin and fragile 5-inch hose and either grind a hole in it with a spinning tire or burn a hole in it with a catalytic converter, and now we've got our eggs all in one basket. My dad would ask me, Bill, you pull a backup line, what good is a backup line if it is coming off the same engine as the primary line and that engine breaks down? And I didn't really have a good answer for him. I didn't. Now, since then, we've made some plans, and every fire department has to have a plan B. What if that rig breaks down? Well, why would it break down? Well, in this world of electronically controlled diesel engines, that rig can break down for any number of sensors that tells you something's wrong when it really isn't wrong. You got to have a plan B. What is our plan B? We'll still lay in the line, but we put a water thief manifold on the end of that supply line before we use a short pony section into the intake of our pump. If that rig should break down with lines inside of a building, we would immediately have another engine pump their booster tank water into that apparatus, turning the disabled apparatus into a manifold, and then rapidly disconnect their water supply from the water thief manifold and put a line into the functioning apparatus and reestablish our water supply. That's our plan. There's other ones too. I was in the Wisconsin area discussing how they operate in Milwaukee. I understand that the second engine will lay the first engine align and take a position connected to the hydrant. So if the first engine was to break down, the second engine would just have to boost the pressure that they're receiving from the hydrant because they're tied into the hydrant. So my point is that there's a lot of ways to use LDH other than just a big, simple length of soft suction. And we're past the halfway point. Speaking of large diameter hose, my department recently bought several short sections of key LDH, and the durability is remarkable. The kink resistance with LDH is a issue, especially when you're connected up at a hydrant close to a fire department connection or building or parked cars. It is an issue. So remember that the key not only makes the finest hand lines available with their combat ready, but they make a fine variety of large diameter hose lines for supply lines. And remember now, there's two types of LDH. There's LDH for supply and for attack. I understand that the maximum pressure for supply is 185 PSI, and some departments make the mistake of trying to pump a fire department connection at higher than that with a Storz fire department connection. But we'll get into more of that later with Paul. So Jason, before we go any further with actually, you had a water supply problem last night. So can you tell us a little bit about the fire and about the water supply problem?
Yeah, we had a potential water supply problem that had it escalated, we would have had to have a plan B. But yeah, we had a apartment fire, 8 units, common foyer stairwell, so it's split 4 on each side with a basement. Came in as a dryer fire. Crews arrived, and real alertly, one company went to do fire attack. Another company went to the back and actually made 2 saves off the balcony. Some pretty heavy smoke conditions on the Charlie side. Which anytime you start getting companies working fast right away, you've got to really pay attention to what's going on. But the 2 attack companies made the basement. Sounded like they got a knock on it. And then as soon as they thought they had a knock on it, their demeanor, voice, everything changed in that basement. Heat conditions, deteriorating conditions, fire was starting to be reported on the exterior. Second floor conditions were deteriorating. And what we ended up having was a gas-fed fire in that basement. It was on a big horseshoe type development, only 2 hydrants on that horseshoe that's probably maybe a half a mile in total length or a little less. And luckily, we were able to recognize that things weren't adding up. What we were seeing on the outside, what we were hearing on the inside, we were able to pull those crews out. And what we ended up having was a partial collapse underneath or above where the gas-fed fire was actually originated, what we believed to be anyway. And the reason the basement crews couldn't get to all the fire and it got so hot was they couldn't see the fire because of that partial collapse out in front of them. And so luckily, Legacy. Go ahead, Bill.
Would you describe the environment, tenant storage area? Some of our worst apartment fires are the dread tenant storage areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
How they're configured typically, and this is nationwide, and the problem associated with them.
Yeah, so a lot of our buildings, apartment buildings, have this set up like Bill said, and you go down to the stairs, and there's usually a basement to the right and a basement to the left, and they're separated by that common foyer. But both of them are not finished, and one end typically is used for storage. And the way they divide that up is they just kind of frame out little modules, and then they wrap it all in chicken wire. And they'll put, like this one looked like it had some plywood on the doors to keep like a sort of rigid door that they burned the tops off of. But it's really difficult to get to the contents and to figure out where you are. It can cause some disorientation. But heavy fire loads. In fact, the partial collapse was only partial because there was so much stuff underneath it. The floor wasn't able to come all the way down. And some pretty heavy conditions. And it hit 2 chases in that building and went all the way to the attic. So we had some fire on the second floor. We had a small collapse right around the chase area that caused the second floor area to collapse a little bit too. Nothing catastrophic like we had on the first floor on the Bravo wall. But for us, we did have 3 aerial devices, but water was going to be an issue, not because of the pipes, but because of the location of hydrants and not enough of them. And the third, we did have the 2 hydrants we were hooked to. The third one that we would have needed had we gone into hydraulics would have been probably 700-800 feet out to the entrance and across a 4-lane highway. But the crews did a fantastic job. We had to pull everybody out until we could get the gas shut off. The gas meters were in the basement. We thought we were being smart, checking the building next door because it looks like the same building on the outside, but that building had no basement. So all the meters were a bank like you would see on the outside.
What were the floors supported with?
It was true dimensional lumber. It wasn't lightweight. It was true 2x6s, 2x8s, steel beams in the basement. So it took a lot of heat damage. I took a lot of pictures, and there were a lot of places where it didn't fail because of the dimensional lumber.
Do you think the outcome would have been different if the floor had been supported by lightweight engineered I-joists or parallel cord floor trusses?
Absolutely. I think that as well established as that fire was when we got there, lightweight construction like you described probably would have been through multiple floors and probably through the roof by the time we got line stretched, because it was a well-established fire when we got there.
Yeah, watch out for those tenant storage areas, and don't become complacent if you have the NFPA 13R sprinkler systems that flow about 0.5 gallons per minute for every 10 square feet. It ain't going to cut it with a fire load in the tenant storage area. It was never designed for that, especially when there's racks and bundles down there with that kind of fire loading. Jason, did you find out or did you know beforehand due to pre-fire intelligence that you had dimensional lumber, more of a conventional type 3 construction?
I had a pretty good idea, most of us, that it was legacy built, that it wasn't, but we always proceed with caution. You just can't always know. Like, for example, if they rebuild this building, I guarantee you it's not going to be legacy built construction at that point. And so we get enough fires in these buildings, and this part of our fire district and Blackjack, which is where that fire was, those apartment buildings are older. They're true dimensional lumber. However, we get further west in our district, it's all lightweight. It's all the I-joists and the trusses and all of those things. So we don't always assume or say that we know 100%, but we had a pretty good idea it was legacy built.
Okay. Well, a good stop. I looked at the pictures, and it looks like your guys, you have a tenacious, tough group, and they must have taken a beating going down those stairs. Was there a fire door between the stairway to the rest of the building and the basement?
There was a door. It didn't feel very. I didn't get a chance to really look at this morning when I went back. There was a door, but most of the fire itself didn't. It's a pretty big area. It didn't look like it actually got to the door. It all stayed on that half of the building, luckily, but mostly because the guys did a really great job. When they found out they couldn't get the gas-fed fire out from the interior, we dumped, I think, 2 or 3 2.5s in the basement windows just to keep it from spreading. It did get to the attic, but once we got the gas shut off, they were back in as far as they could get and got that thing knocked out. They saved the building. They definitely saved the building, no doubt about it.
Chief Holderman.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'd like to add something, and it's not based on your fire because I wasn't there, so I can't say anything about it. On large fires, when it comes to water supply, we tend to, at least the first alarm, we tend to focus on fire attack, fire attack, fire attack. And a lot of times we forget that we need water for fire attack until we need water. And what I like to teach is to be proactive in regards to water supply. Obviously, the first-in-chief has so much going for him. It's hard to think of everything. But a water supply officer, as soon as a water supply officer can be developed, it's that person's responsibility to totally get the water. And I have what I like to teach on a first alarm assignment, if possible, if your alarm allows for it. and it looks like the fire can go big, at least big water, I like to take one engine out of that assignment if it's not going to be used and have them immediately reverse out from the area and go hit a plug somewhere else. This is before the water's needed. If it looks like it's going to possibly go that big, let's set up for it. So when the time comes we need the water, we don't have to wait 10, 15 minutes to lay a relay and charge it. So what I like to do is lay the line out, have the engine hooked to the hydrant, but not charge the line. Basically because it's easier to pick up and there's no water in it. And if they're decided that they do need the water, it takes 2 minutes to charge a relay line. So you got to be proactive and think of these things. And as I mentioned earlier, and we kind of discussed it, you got to put pumps on the hydrant. Just because it's LDH, it's not a miracle hose. You got to put pumps on the hydrant because even LDH has friction loss.
If I can add to this part of the conversation, we talked about having a plan B, and a plan B, if you're not putting it into your plan A, can just be too long to get into place once something goes wrong. Yeah. And kind of what I'm getting at is what Paul is talking about, is having another engine company prepared to either augment that water supply or connect to another hydrant if something goes wrong. One way you can build your plan B into the system, if you're doing a forward lay, I'm a big proponent of using a four-way valve. That way, if you have, there's so many tricks you could do with these valves. If that hydrant isn't giving you the water and the fire progresses, like in Jason's fire last night, and that hydrant isn't giving you proper water, you can pump from a better hydrant right through the four-way valve if your MDT system or whatever, however you mark your hydrants, you find that there is a better hydrant in a location, and you can put a engine on another hydrant pumping right through the four-way valve. You can have an engine at the hydrant in case the pump fails, and they can pump through that four-way valve and augment pressure in case of an engine failure or you need more pressure. And for departments that do a fire to hydrant lay, like in the FDNY or in San Francisco, just taking a engine from that pumper to another hydrant and just being prepared. And that way, if something goes wrong or you have pressure issues, volume issues, your plan B is already set in motion, and we're not scrambling to try to fix a problem.
And Daryl, to add one little side note to this, when you leave engines in staging, leave a few pump operators with the engines. I know everybody wants to go fight fire. I was a water supply officer at a fire one time, and we had 5 engines sitting in staging, and we needed to set up a relay fast. And I looked over, and they were empty engines. The firefighters either dressed up and went in or were taking pictures. So at least leave a couple of operators to be ready to go.
Yeah.
And Paul, that's our plan B was exactly what you mentioned, was to reverse from the third ladder truck to the big hydrant out across that 4-lane highway. They were that was all set up and ready to go. And you're right. We had a staging officer hold 2 pieces of apparatus near that entrance just for that exact purpose, like you said.
Yeah, real good.
Paulie, I knew there was a reason why I liked you, and I knew I liked you, but I just didn't know why. But now I know why. Couple thoughts on that. Check your hydrant. Don't lay to a hydrant you haven't checked. Check the hydrant. Back down. That's where we like that portable hydrant. We call it a water thief manifold. Put that thing on there. You've got a manifold right there. You can take several lines off of it. Then back down so you got your hose bed pointed where it wants to go at the fire, and the apparatus is going towards the hydrant. I got to go charge. I got to go get the battery charger. What I want you to talk about a little bit, Paulie, is getting the most out of your hydrant. I think a lot of our viewers, or a large segment, might not understand that there's more than one outlet on a hydrant for a reason, Paulie. Could you elaborate on that while I go get my power cord before I run out of battery here?
I sure can. 1 second. I have some notes with numbers because it's hard to memorize all these numbers. Give me 1 second here. Basically, the standard hydrant for most people is a steamer port, 4-inch, 4.5, or whatever size it is, and two 2.5s. Chicago's got the right idea. They have 2 steamer ports, period. Their supply lines are large diameter. They're not 2.5-inch supply lines anymore. So why do we need a 2.5-inch port? Well, we have them, and we might as well use them. On average, a 2.5-inch hydrant port, when hooked to supply line, that's the key, when hooked to hose, can get about 80% of what the steamer port can get on average. And I have several flow tests to back it up. The other thing is, we tend to talk about hydrants. When I go to teach, I said what I need is really good hydrants because I'm teaching a big water class. Oh yeah, we got great hydrants. They're all 90 or above. Well, that 90 they're talking about is the static pressure. Okay, that may be good, but we need to know what's coming out of the hydrant. I worked on a hydrant once that had 150 psi static pressure. We only got 400 GPM out of it because it had a 3-inch main hook to it. So volume is equally important, if not more important. You could always make pressure with a pumper. You can't make volume if it's not there. Okay, so if you're, I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit, to maximize your hydrant, let's just say you're the pump on the hydrant setting up for a relay, a minimum of 2 LDH lines. If you think the hydrant's got enough oomph behind it, do 3 lines. In fact, do 3 lines just for a practice and see what you get. It takes an extra minute or so, and there's a lot more to be gotten out of a hydrant. Example, one of our training center hydrants that I did some flow tests on, we did the old NFPA check on the hydrant, and the hydrant itself gave us, let's see, 2016 GPM. That's without hose. Okay, we hooked a single 5-inch line to it and got 1250 GPM. We didn't maximize the water in the ground. We wound up doing a couple other things. One was we used 2 lines off the hydrant. These are on 400-foot lays, and we got right around 1700 GPM. But then we used 2 hydrants into one pumper off the same main, which was an 8-inch main, a looped main in our training center, and we got 2300 GPM. So there's a lot more water in the ground than we really think there is. We just got to get it out of the ground. Had one fellow, I'll just tell you this real quick. I taught a class for them where they're changing over from 2.5 and 3-inch to 5-inch. And one guy came up to me and says, "We don't need large diameter. We have a great water system." And I told him, "Well, to be honest with you, Cap, we've got Lake Mead." But if you can't get the water out of the lake, or if you can't get the water out of your great hydrant system, which you can't with 2.5 and 3-inch unless you lay multiple lines, it does no good. So don't let the water system deceive you. If it appears good, let's see what you get from it. And be ready for the worst. Don't try it and say, "Oh, that didn't work, let's do this." That all takes time. Practice like it's going to be a big one, and you're going to need all the water you can get.
Paul, would you comment on the second line coming into, we make a connection to a 5-inch to our steamer intake.
Uh-huh.
But then I see a lot of companies, they'll put a gate valve on one of the 2.5s, but then they will take a second, say a 3-inch line, and invariably they connect it into the auxiliary intake. Would you talk a little bit about the restriction and the limitations on connecting hose lines into the auxiliary 2.5-inch intakes of engines?
Sure. As most of you, or probably all of you know, that's the inlet we use to fill our booster tank. And that's what it's designed for. Most of them have at least 2 90-degree elbows, and it's 2.5-inch plumbing. but they match the coupling size to the intake size. They forget they have adapters. I recently did a float test back in Louisiana, and I was surprised to see we ran a 4-inch line into an auxiliary intake, and it was under pressure because it was a relay operation. We wanted to see what we can get because this particular engine didn't have a lot of intakes. Would you believe on a 500-foot lay, we got 800 GPM through that 2.5-inch auxiliary? But that was under 185 PSI relay pressure. You won't get it from the hydrant. It's always going to be better than nothing, but bigger is better when it comes to intakes.
Sure. And what I convinced our guys to do in a recent flow test is instead of using a 3-inch line from the 2.5-inch gate, from the 2.5-inch outlet into the auxiliary intake, use an increaser, if you will, 2.5-inch female national standard to 5-inch stores to 5-inch hose, and come into the steamer intake connection on the other side of the apparatus. Exactly. And we had some gallons a minute from that hydrant.
Yeah. So again, people tend. Go ahead.
No, that's why I wanted you to discuss some of these things and expectations for sure. So that means we're going to have you back again, because I think we could go on water supply as one of those issues that we could continue for quite some time. In the little time that we have left, Daryl, you kind of piqued my interest when you had a hand in your water supply system. That's your hose, your and your pumps on your department, on the Oakland Fire Department. A little bit about the changes that you had an influence in.
We formed a hose and nozzle committee, and currently I'm the chair of that committee. Dennis Laguerre, who most of you know, was also on that committee, and he was a lot of the brains behind the water supply. But at the time, Oakland for many years laid dual 3-inch lines. Back in the days when we had to hang hose and let it dry, and what happened is, and probably just out of, getting away with fighting fire with a couple of 1.5-inch, that just kind of evolved into laying a single 3-inch line into an auxiliary inlet. And we got away with it for quite a while until we increased our structure fire flow and went from 1.5 to 1.75 lines and increased our flow up to 150. So then that water supply was completely inadequate, and it showed itself to where we had to change either change the diameter of our supply or go back to laying dual 3s. And what we did is we increased our supply line to 4-inch, and we got new 4-way valves. So now we use a HUMAT 4-way valve, and we are a forward lay department. I find a lot of benefit in back stretching from fire to hydrant, but we're not going to do a wholesale change. So we did a combination of things. We put static hose beds on the rear of the engine in conjunction with our cross lays. So that gives the ability to go from fire to hydrant. And then that way, not only can we maximize the water supply by having that pump on the hydrant, it's also a force multiplier by having one additional member at the fire. But that is not commonly done. And with the 4-way valve, we can put an engine at the hydrant in case there is a inadequate pressure. We're a really hilly city. We have a lot of topography and very steep hills, and we can put an engine at the hydrant and increase that. And even with 4-inch, it is LDH, but it is not maximizing that hydrant unless we were to lay dual 4s, which we don't do, but we would just want to start some training on what we can do to maximize that hydrant if we are forward laying. But right now I find that to really maximize it, the best thing is to put an engine at the 4-way or do a back stretch to that. to the hydrant.
Well, a light bulb just went off in my head, a very dim bulb, but nonetheless a light bulb. I think we ought to do for next month is let's get and we'll submit some pictures that one of the princesses that oversees us, either Sarah or Shannon, can put online. We can look at, and we'll discuss some of these different. Some of our viewers might not ever seen a full wave valve or really know how they work. And there's different types, and we can look at some of these different appliances and delve into those. I'm always fascinated with looking at other fire departments' hose beds configurations. Sam Hiddle, I'm still on his butt because he has not sent me pictures of the hose bed of the engine that he has or had in his station before he was promoted to captain. But I'm on his butt to do that. But in the last few minutes that we have, we'll close out. Let's start with Clark. Any closing thoughts till next month? Clark, are you there?
He's there, but I can't hear him.
Okay, he may have been muted out.
Toll booth ahead.
Well, I guess I'll say a couple closing thoughts.
Go ahead, Daryl. Go ahead, brother.
And this is not really in regards to water supply, but back to this Trump Tower high-rise fire. And I haven't been to a 50-story fire, but one of the things I was concerned with immediately is sealing to glass.
I got to go. Another fire.
Sealing to floor glass.
Stay safe, brother.
When you have ceiling to floor glass, I can imagine someone advancing a hose line or doing a search and actually falling out of the building. I've seen this on shorter, houses where somebody ends up going right out of a sliding glass window that has failed. So if you are in a building and there's any portion of it that's ceiling to floor glass, make sure you're being extra cautious or you can end up advancing right out of the building.
Yeah, I want to bring up a point here again about Massey. Curtis Massey will be appearing at FDIC, and he will have the incident commander with him that was on this fire. And for the life of me, his name is long and it has a lot of consonants. If somebody wants to give me a hashtag right now, I'll try to pronounce his name. Bill McCary, if you're watching. And you can put that chief's name up here. I'll go ahead and give him a shout out. Mike Dugan, do you happen to know that incident commander's last name?
I'm not sure who it was, Bill. But let me just say one thing on Clark's, and I will sign off with that, is Lieutenant Tommy Williams, Rescue 4, FDNY, floor to ceiling glass, second floor of a building, commercial on the first, second floor, fell out. He was a line of duty. Okay, you can read that in the NIOSH report. Floor to ceiling glass, heavy smoke condition, window. Okay, be very, very careful of those.
I hear you, Mike. By the way, your experiment was a success. You did extremely well considering, that you're driving. So, Daryl, until next month, I think that Clark and, another shout out to Key Hose. Well, that's an easy one for me, brother. An easy one for me. As I said, I am project manager for introducing 2-inch hose for our standpipe operations. Again, not discounting the fact that we may very well have to use 2.5-inch hose. But our primary hose will be 2-inch with 2.5-inch couplings. That's what works for us, may not work for you. It all depends upon your research, your systems, your fire loading, but not your staffing. It's not a consideration of staffing. The size of the fire determines the size of the hose. The size of the hose will determine the size of the staffing, the size of the crew. So, till next month, and we're going to continue this discussion on water supply. I want to thank our special guest, Paul Shapiro. Again, he will be teaching at FDIC and get a copy of his book on water supply. The guy's a master at his craft. So until next month, let's remember our fallen brothers and sisters in our prayers. It hasn't been a very good month for the fire service. And hope to see you at FDIC. And I hope you stay safe and keep your hearts and your heads in this most noble profession. God bless you. Until next month.